She had worked for this moment for 9 years. 9 years of arriving early and staying late. 9 years of doing the work that nobody noticed until it wasn't done. 9 years of being the most prepared person in every room she entered, and still being the one who had to prove it every single time. The promotion was finally within reach. Senior Vice President of Human Resources. The title, the office, the seat at the table she had earned 3 times over and been passed over for twice. This time was different. They had told her this time was different. And then she found the file. And after she found the file, she understood that the promotion was not a reward. It was a trap. Welcome to Corporate Chaos Scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing is off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like because we bring you stories like this every week. Her name is Artemisia Cole, 38 years old, HR manager at Aldridge and Voss Group, a financial services and consulting conglomerate headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, with offices in 7 cities and a client portfolio that touched government contracts, private equity, and corporate advisory work at a level that made the name Aldridge and Voss one of those names that serious people in serious rooms said without needing to explain what it meant. Artemisia had come up through the company the hard way, which is to say, the real way, not through a legacy connection, not through a prestigious MBA that opened the executive track before she had proven anything, but through 9 years of demonstrated performance that had moved her from an entry-level HR coordinator position to the manager role she now held. She had a reputation, not the soft kind, not just pleasant to work with, not just good with people, which was the condescending shorthand that certain kinds of HR work attracted from executives who had never thought seriously about what the function actually required. Her reputation was for precision, for the ability to navigate the most complex people situations in the organization, disputes, performance management, structural reorganizations, the kinds of HR crises that companies paid consultants 6 figures to manage when they didn't have someone like Artemisia on the inside. She was, in the honest assessment of the people who had worked alongside her for years, the best HR professional in the building. She had been passed over for the SVP position twice. The first time, she had been told she needed more exposure to the executive layer. She had spent the following 18 months cultivating exactly that exposure. The second time, she had been told the timing wasn't right, a phrase so devoid of meaning that she had gone home and sat with a glass of wine for 2 hours before she trusted herself to respond to the email professionally. The third time, she had been called into a meeting with Kareem Aldridge. Not a Kareem Aldridge, the Kareem Aldridge, 49 years old, executive vice president and the grandson of one of the 2 founding partners, which gave him a specific kind of authority that was simultaneously formal and dynastic. He was the kind of man who understood power the way certain people understand a native language, fluently, without having to think about it, from a time before he could have articulated what power was. He had told her, in that meeting, that the SVP role was hers, that the board had discussed it, that her work had been recognized at the level it deserved, that she would receive the formal offer within 10 days. He had shaken her hand. He had smiled. He had said, "Artemisia, this company is better because you're in it." She had believed him. She had wanted to believe him, and she had believed him, which is a combination that a woman with her intelligence and her instincts should perhaps have examined more carefully. But she had wanted this for 9 years. And the thing you want most is the thing that the wanting makes hardest to see clearly. She went back to her office. She was not someone who showed things at work that she didn't intend to show, but she closed her door and she sat at her desk for 5 minutes with her eyes closed, and she let herself feel what she felt. She had earned this. She had absolutely earned this. She had no idea what she was about to walk into. 3 days after the meeting with Kareem, Artemisia received a system notification she had not seen before. An access grant, temporary 48-hour window, to the restricted Executive HR Archive. The notification said it was part of the SVP onboarding preparation, that she would need familiarity with the executive-level files she would be managing in her new role, that a full briefing would follow. The access was logged. The notification was formal. Everything about it looked like standard process. She went in the following morning, early before the floor filled up, in the specific quality of an office building at 7:15 a.m. when the cleaning staff are finishing and the first arrivals haven't yet come through. The Executive HR Archive was on the 31st floor, a different floor from her usual workspace, a floor she had been to twice in 9 years, a floor that had a particular quality of deliberate quiet that the regular office floors did not. She sat down at the terminal. She navigated the file structure with the systematic approach she brought to everything. She was not looking for anything in particular. She was doing what the notification had asked her to do, familiarizing herself with the landscape of what she would be managing. The file was in the 3rd folder she opened. It was labeled in capital letters on a red background that the system used for the highest classification level. Confidential, internal investigation, executive only. She should have closed it. She knew this later. She knew it immediately, in the moment, even as her hand moved toward the folder rather than away from it. She was an HR professional. She understood classification levels. She understood that executive only meant exactly what it said. But the folder was in an archive she had just been granted access to. It was in a location that the access grant covered. And she told herself this, which was the rationalization that her curiosity used, preparing for a role in which this would be her territory. She had been given access. She had access. She opened the folder. What she found inside was not a file. It was a history. An internal investigation spanning 14 months that had been initiated, conducted, documented, and then buried. Not concluded. Buried. The distinction was specific, and it was damning. The investigation had been triggered by a series of complaints, 7 in total, filed by employees across 3 departments, all within a 15-month window, all describing variations of the same pattern: financial irregularities in contractor billing, with specific invoice structures that appeared to generate payments to entities that could not be verified as legitimate vendors. The complaints had been filed through the HR reporting system, the same system Artemisia managed, the same system she had, in good faith, maintained as a confidential reporting channel for 9 years. Every complaint had been received. Every complaint had been logged. Every complaint had been investigated by a small, specially constituted internal team that reported not to the board, but to Kareem Aldridge directly. Every complaint had been resolved. Resolved in the specific sense that the investigation had been marked complete. The complainants had received communications thanking them for raising concerns and confirming that the matter had been reviewed and no further action was required, and the documentation had been filed in this archive at the highest classification level where it would sit, unseen, until someone with the right access and the wrong timing opened it. The financial irregularities were not resolved. They were documented and then covered. The contractor billing structure that the 7 complaints had flagged was a mechanism for routing payments. The investigation team's own internal documentation estimated the total at $43 million over 4 years. To a network of entities whose beneficial ownership, following the investigation team's own analysis, could be traced to individuals with personal connections to Aldridge and Voss's executive leadership. The investigation had found the fraud. The investigation had then been used to bury the evidence of the fraud rather than to address it. Artemisia sat at that terminal on the 31st floor at 7:23 in the morning and read every page. It took her 94 minutes. When she was finished, she sat very still for a long time. And then she noticed the last document in the folder. Not the investigation summary, not the financial analysis. A memo, dated 11 days ago, 3 days before she had received the access notification, 3 days before her meeting with Kareem. The memo was addressed to the company's outside legal counsel. It outlined the transition plan for the SVP of Human Resources role. It described the incoming SVP's responsibilities, which included, listed as the 3rd bullet point in a section titled Legacy File Management, the ongoing stewardship and maintenance of the Executive HR Archive, including the existing classified investigation materials. Her name was in the 3rd paragraph, not as the incoming SVP, as the individual who would, upon assuming the role, become the custodian of record for the classified investigation file. The custodian of record, the person whose name was legally attached to the existence and maintenance of a file documenting $43 million in covered-up financial fraud. The person who, if this ever came to light, would be the first name on the document that proved someone at Aldridge and Voss had known about it and kept it buried. She was not being promoted. She was being installed. She closed the terminal. She logged out. She gathered her bag and her coffee cup, and she walked to the lift with the same measured pace she used every morning. Because the building had cameras, and she understood now, with a clarity that had arrived very quickly and was not going to leave, that being seen to be calm was the only thing she could control in the next 24 hours. She drove to a coffee shop 4 blocks from the office. Not her usual one, a different one, somewhere she was not known, somewhere nobody from Aldridge and Voss went. She ordered something. She did not drink it. She sat in a booth at the back and she thought. She was an HR professional. She understood documentation, classification, legal exposure, and institutional liability with the depth of someone who had managed all of those things for a major organization for 9 years. She understood with precision exactly what the memo had done. By naming her as the incoming custodian of record, before she had even formally accepted the role, they had created a document that linked her to the file before she had formally been made aware of it. If this went wrong, if the fraud was ever externally discovered, if a regulator or a law enforcement agency ever found the file, the paper trail led to her. Kareem had not offered her a promotion. Kareem had offered her a position from which she could not leave, without walking into a legal situation she had not created. She thought about the 7 employees who had filed the original complaints. HR professionals have a specific relationship with this category of person. The person who sees something, weighs the personal risk, decides to report anyway, and trusts the system to do what it is supposed to do. Those 7 people had trusted the system. The system had thanked them for their concern and done nothing. Some of them were still at the company. Some had left. None of them knew that their complaints were sitting in a classified file that had been turned into a liability trap for someone else. She thought about 9 years. She thought about what it had cost her, not abstractly, specifically. The hours, the decisions, the moments she had absorbed something difficult without complaint because she believed the work was building toward something real. The 2 times she had been passed over and had, instead of leaving, decided that her record would eventually speak for itself. The record had spoken for itself. That was exactly the problem. It had spoken loudly enough that Kareem Aldridge had decided she was the right person to be holding the document that could put her in prison. She sat in the booth for a long time. Then she took out her personal phone, not her work phone, and she called her cousin, Deja. Deja was a criminal defense attorney in Atlanta. They had not spoken about anything professional in the 3 years since Deja had moved her practice to a new firm. Artemisia had not needed her professionally. Until now. Deja picked up on the second ring. Artemisia said, "I need to meet with you today. As a client. Not as your cousin. As a client." Deja was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then she said, "I have a 2 o'clock that I can move. Come to my office at 1. Artemisia said, "Don't bill me the same rate you'd bill someone you don't know." Deja said, "Girl, I'm going to charge you exactly what I charge everyone else, and you're going to be grateful because you need the best version of me, and the best version of me has a rate card." Artemisia laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 4 hours, and it was the laugh of someone releasing something that had been held very tightly. Then she said, 1 o'clock. She hung up. She drank the cold coffee. She drove back to the office. She performed the rest of the morning with the specific, controlled composure of a woman who had spent 9 years learning how to be professional in difficult circumstances, and who had just found out that the difficulty she had been preparing for was larger than she had imagined. Kareem passed her in the corridor at 10:30. He said, "Good morning, Artemisia. How are we feeling today?" She said, "Excellent, thank you. Looking forward to the next steps." He smiled. She smiled. She kept walking. The meeting with Deja lasted 3 hours. Artemisia put everything on the table: the access notification, the file, the memo, the dates, the sequence, all of it, in the precise and organized account of someone who had spent 3 hours in a coffee shop booth getting her thinking straight before she opened her mouth to anyone. Deja listened without interrupting until Artemisia finished. Then she said, "Tell me the timeline again. When was the memo dated? When did you get the access notification? When did you have the meeting with Kareem?" Artemisia told her again. Deja said, "The memo predates your access notification by 3 days. That matters. That's not an accident. That's the sequence they needed to create the paper trail." Artemisia said, "I know." Deja said, "You accessed the file through a legitimately granted access notification. You did not hack it. You did not bypass any classification protocols. You were given access through a formal system process. That also matters." Artemisia said, "I know that too." Deja said, "What you don't have is a copy of the file. You read it. You didn't print it. You didn't photograph it. You didn't forward it." Artemisia said, "No." I closed the terminal and left. Deja was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That was actually the right decision, even if it wasn't a fully conscious one. Going back for it now would be a different legal situation than what you're currently in." Artemisia said, "So what am I currently in?" Deja said, "Right now? Nothing they can touch. You accessed a file through authorized credentials. You read information in the course of performing a role you'd been told was yours. You have not disclosed, you have not removed, you have not done anything other than read something that was placed in your path. That's not a crime. She paused. She said, what it is the beginning of a decision that has two outcomes and no middle ground. Artemisia said, I know what the two outcomes are. Deja said, say them out loud anyway. I need to hear you say them. Artemisia looked at her cousin across the desk. She said, Option 1, I take the promotion. I become the custodian of record. I keep the file buried. I have the title, the salary, the office, and the knowledge of what I'm part of for the rest of my career, or until the whole thing falls apart and I fall with it. Deja said, and Option 2. Artemisia said, Option 2. I go to the authorities. I disclose everything I saw. I become a federal witness in an investigation of a company whose legal resources are about 10 times greater than mine. I lose the job. I probably lose the career in this city for a while. And because my name is on that memo as the custodian of record, I spend the next year of my life explaining to investigators, and potentially to a jury, why I should be a witness in this case rather than a defendant. Deja said, That's a complete summary. There's one thing you're missing. Artemisia said, What's that? Deja said, There are 7 people who reported fraud to an HR system they trusted, got a thank you letter and no action, and have no idea their complaints are sitting in a file being used as a liability instrument. Whatever you decide, those 7 people are part of the calculation. The room was quiet. Artemisia looked at the window, Atlanta outside, the city that she had built a career in a company she had believed in, at a cost she was only now beginning to fully assess. She said, I know. She said it in a way that meant, I've known since I was sitting in that booth this morning. She said it in a way that meant, I've already decided. She reported to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division on a Thursday, not the SEC. Deja had walked her through the jurisdictional analysis and the specific nature of the contractor billing fraud, which had elements that made the FBI the correct first call. She did not bring documents. She could not. The file was in a classified archive she no longer had access to. She brought the account. Precise, detailed, chronological, delivered with the professional clarity of a woman who had spent 9 years being the most prepared person in every room she entered. The agent who took her initial statement asked her, 40 minutes in, whether she had any background in law. She said, No. Human resources. He said, You present information like an attorney. She said, I present information the way I present everything, accurately and in order. He nodded. He said, We're going to need you to come back. She came back 4 times over the following 3 weeks, each session built on the previous one. She reconstructed the file from memory, the dates, the complaint summaries, the financial analysis, the structure of the cover-up, the names attached to each element, with an accuracy that the investigators, when they obtained the actual file through a formal legal process, subsequently confirmed was precise. She had read every page for 94 minutes at 7:15 in the morning, 3 weeks prior, and she had remembered all of it, because Artemisia Cole remembered everything. It was the quality that had made her exceptional at her job for 9 years. It was the quality that Kareem Aldridge had identified and had decided to use. He had miscalculated what he was actually giving her. The week after her 3rd meeting with the FBI, Artemisia received a calendar invitation. A meeting, 31st floor, Kareem's office suite, subject line, SVP transition, formal offer discussion. She accepted the invitation. She arrived on time. She wore the suit she wore when she needed to feel like the most put-together version of herself. She took the lift to 31, with the specific quality of composure that you build when you understand that what is about to happen in the next room is not what the other person thinks is about to happen. Kareem was in the meeting room with two other people, the company's general counsel, a man named Philip Shore, and a woman from the outside law firm that handled Aldridge and Voss's employment matters. There was a folder on the table. There was a pen. Kareem said, "Artemisia, we are delighted to formalize this today. The board has signed off. The title, the compensation package, and the scope of the role are all in the offer letter." He slid the folder across the table. She did not open it. She said, "Before we get into the offer letter, I'd like to talk about the confidential, internal investigation, executive-only file in the restricted archive. Specifically, the $43 million in contractor billing fraud and the 14-month cover-up that your internal investigation team documented and then buried." Kareem's expression did not move immediately. This is the thing she has described most clearly in the account she has given since. It did not move immediately. The control he had over his own face was real. But it moved. In the space of approximately 2 seconds, something shifted underneath the composure. Philip Shore said, "I'm not sure what you're—" Artemisia said, "I've already spoken to the FBI 3 times over the past 3 weeks. I believe you should probably call your attorneys." She looked at Kareem. She said, "I know you thought I was the right person for the custodian of record role because I was someone who had invested too much in this company to risk it. 9 years. You thought 9 years of investment was the thing that was going to keep me quiet." She stood up. She said, "You were wrong about what 9 years did to me. 9 years of watching this company from the inside taught me exactly what it was. And it taught me that the people who reported to my system trusted it to do the right thing. I'm not going to be the person who proves them wrong." She picked up her bag. She looked at the folder with the offer letter in it, still on the table, still unopened. She said, "I'll see myself out." She walked to the lift. She pressed the button. She wrote it down. She did not cry until she was in her car. She sat in the parking structure for 11 minutes. Then she drove to Deja's office. The federal investigation into Aldridge and Voss Group took 16 months. The FBI obtained the classified investigation file, the financial records underlying it, the contractor entity structures, and the beneficial ownership documentation through a combination of search warrants and voluntary cooperation from employees who, once the investigation became known, came forward with information they had been sitting on for years. 3 of the original 7 complainants testified. They had not known, until investigators contacted them, what had happened to their complaints. 2 of them had left the company in the years since. 1 was still there. All 3 said variations of the same thing. They had been thanked for raising concerns and told the matter had been reviewed and resolved and that they should consider the matter closed. All 3 had spent years wondering if they had done the right thing. All 3 now knew that they had. Kareem Aldridge was indicted on 9 counts of wire fraud, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. He faced a maximum exposure that his attorney spent 18 months trying to negotiate down from. He ultimately pleaded guilty on 6 counts. He received 7 years. He is not at Aldridge and Voss. He is not in a position of corporate authority. The company that his grandfather helped found has been restructured under new leadership as part of the resolution process. Philip Shore, the general counsel, cooperated with the investigation in exchange for a reduced charge of a single count of obstruction. He lost his license. He is no longer practicing law. Artemisia was not charged. Deja had been correct about the legal position from the beginning, and the investigators and the subsequent prosecution confirmed it throughout. She had accessed the file through authorized credentials. She had not removed or altered anything. She had gone to the authorities voluntarily within 3 weeks of discovering the file, and she had cooperated completely. Her role in the investigation was as a witness, the most thorough, precise, and well-prepared witness the lead investigator said he had worked with in 11 years. She lost her job. Formally, she resigned before she could be terminated because Deja had advised this was the correct sequencing. She was placed on a list at 2 major Atlanta firms within 6 months of the investigation becoming public. Not the companies she would have thought would call her, but the right ones, the ones whose leadership had seen what had happened and had assessed Artemisia Cole not as someone who had created a scandal, but as someone who had been placed in an impossible position and had done the hardest thing. She is currently the chief people officer at one of those firms. She has been there for 2 years. She has rebuilt an HR reporting system from the ground up. It is externally audited. The audit results are shared with the board quarterly. The complaints that come through it are reviewed by an independent committee that does not report to any single executive. She built it that way deliberately. She built it so that if someone files a complaint, they will not receive a thank you letter and silence. They will receive an answer. That is the story of Artemisia Cole. The 9 years, the file, the memo with her name on it, and the meeting on the 31st floor where she put the unopened offer letter back on the table and walked to the lift. Drop a comment below. What would you have done? Because I want you to be honest with yourself. The promotion was real. The salary was real. The title was real. And the risk of what she chose was also real. At what point in this story did you know what Artemisia was going to do? And was there a moment where you weren't sure? Tell me. This is the comment section for exactly this conversation. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, hit that button right now. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story about what it costs to do the right thing when doing the right thing is the hardest option on the table. We are here every single week. I'll see you in the next one.